Welcome to this session, and thanks very much for joining. As many of you know, we've now opened up the Academy to external participants. So we're joined today by some external listeners, which is really exciting. By way of reminder to those of you that don't know, the Academy offers university quality education across a wide range of areas, covering the issues that matter most to us and hopefully also to our clients. And the range of topics is really broad. It spans law and non-law. Today we're talking about the section between law and technology in blockchain. A couple of weeks we heard from Alistair Campbell talking about mental health, specifically depression and anxiety. And we're currently benefiting from some of the fascinating and thought-provoking talks that form part of our Black History Month programme. It's all really, really good stuff, and encourage all of you to check out the website and register your interest in anything and everything that speaks to you. Right, to today. I'm going to try and cover three areas. We're going to do the blockchain basics, be a relatively high-level look at the technology, what it is, why it matters, and where it's being used. And then we're then going to look at the legal and regulatory updates, some of the key areas of development over the last 12 months, including the analysis of crypto assets as property, security law analysis and derivatives, some on smart contracts and some on tax. It's worth saying at the outset that this isn't everything that's happened. That's impossible in 45 minutes. And there we don't even begin to touch on the data protection analysis, for example, the competition law analysis, for example. All of those things are really important and things that your organization should be thinking about when you're looking to implement blockchain within your business, but they form outside the scope of this talk. But we're of course on hand to pick those up afterwards, if helpful. And we'll then finish off with some trends and developments in the space, perhaps make a couple of predictions as to what we expect to see in the coming weeks, months, and years. There is a Q&A function on this Zoom, so please do feel free to use it. I'll probably pick all those up at the end, and if we don't have time, we'll follow up with you after the talk. So, blockchain basics. So at its most basic, a blockchain is a ledger, and ledgers aren't exactly new concepts. Our earliest ledgers have been around since ancient Mesopotamia, circa 4000 BC, and they looked like the centralized ledgers on the left. They were clay scripts, or they were stone tablets upon which the ownership of crops in storage was recorded. And in the most part, it worked. If a farmer wanted to check how much grain he owned, he'd go to the script or the stone and he'd check. But that has challenges. What if a farmer perhaps disagreed with what that centralized ledger said from time to time, perhaps because that ledger was tampered with by a rival? As society's grown more and more complex, the issues relating to maintaining centralized ledgers have become more and more pronounced, and that's led to an increase in a decentralized model for ledgers. And if we look at the middle diagram, we're represented by the dots on the outside. We delegate our trust every single day to trusted intermediaries, the core dots, who then in turn connect us to wider networks. Think, for example, about a financial institution like a bank, to whom we delegate our trust regarding our financial records, and they connect us to a wider financial system. Think also about social media giants who connect us to wider social networks. This decentralized model is better and more resilient, but it still has its downsides. That intermediary, be it financial institution or social media giant, still holds the key to the truth at any point in time. If they fail, or if they go rogue, we're in trouble, and we have limited recourse. At the more innocent end of the spectrum, look at the high-profile examples of IT outages within major banks over the last 2 years. But a 20-minute outage can cause real pain and real loss to thousands or millions of people. On the more nefarious end, if you're a a customer of a bank who's owned by the government, and the government fall out with you, you're in trouble if all of a sudden they decide that your bank needs to be empty all of a sudden. Who's your recourse against? It's limited. So we move to the diagram on the right, the distributed network model. They're difficult to maintain, but no single points of failure, and are theoretically infinitely scalable. Crucially, though, this model eliminates the need for a trusted intermediary, and the network polices itself by maintaining a universally held view of the world from time to time, an open, consensus-driven method of maintaining a ledger state. A quick word on terminology. I'm talking about blockchain during this session, but a blockchain is just one way of structuring a ledger in a distributed manner. The umbrella term for the technologies that enable this are called distributed ledger technologies, or DLT. I will use blockchain for the purposes of this session because it's snappier, and the points we're covering are totally applicable to DLT and blockchain interchangeably. But there are a number of nuances that exist between blockchain and other forms of distributed ledger technology, and you need to think about them in some detail when considering an implementation. Again, they fall beyond the scope of this session, but it's something we're absolutely on hand to talk you through and weigh up the merits of different solutions afterwards. So at its heart, blockchain is governance technology that imbues trust in a system. And from that understanding, really, most of its utility flows. Smart contracts sound great and they're cool, but automation isn't exactly new. What's innovative about a blockchain-based smart contract is that the scope for automation is so much greater when everybody has that mutual trust in the ledger that underlies the automation. It's the shared consensus ledger that is the real innovation and what really is quite exciting. Finally, on blockchain basics, where is it being used? This graphic is something we prepared for one of our central bank clients a few weeks ago, looking at central bank blockchain projects. In short, it's being used everywhere. One flag that doesn't appear on here is the Bahamas, which those of you who are monitoring the news closely will have seen that yesterday announced the launch of their digital currency, what they're calling the sand dollar. It's a fast-moving space, and we're really lucky to be at the heart of a few of the more interesting projects globally. Right, though the title of this session is Legal Update 2020, I've cheated a little bit, and I'm going to look back a full 12 months. I've done this for, I hope, a good reason, as last November saw the publication of the UK Jurisdiction Task Force, which is part of the Law Tech Delivery Panel in the UK. They released a legal statement on crypto assets and smart contracts. And one of the key things at the heart of that was what exactly is a crypto asset at property law? Are they even property at all? That's a pretty huge question with some pretty significant ramifications. If it's not property, it can't be owned. If it can't be owned, it can't be stolen. It can't be settled in a trust. It can't be inherited on death, etc., etc. Now, traditionally at law, there are two classes of property: a shows in possession and a shows in action. Broadly speaking, if you can kick it, it's probably a shows in possession. If it's a physical thing, it's probably in possession. Clearly, a crypto asset is unkickable, so that rules that one out. The legal statement, therefore, spent a long time and looked in great detail at shows in action, which it first gave the definition of a right that can be enforced by court litigation. This is also pretty challenging, though, in the crypto asset world. Against whom could a right be enforced? There's no central issuer or maintainer of the ledger, assuming the system is properly distributed. The legal statement therefore conducted a pretty deep dive into the case law and actually adopted a broader definition of shows in action, which they called a catch-all to refer to any property which is not a thing in possession. Now, if this feels a bit of a cop-out, it's because it is, albeit a pretty fair one. The legal statement, in fairness, did conclude that crypto assets might actually constitute a third class of property altogether. But the important thing for our purposes is that the legal statement found that crypto assets are not disqualified from being property on the basis that they constitute pure information. Pure information at English law is not property. And the reason they found that is because crypto assets, they say, have the characteristic of certainty, exclusivity, control, assignability, and permanence. And those are 5 characteristics of property as set out in National Provincial Bank and Ainsworth, which is a 1965 case. And it distinguishes those 5 characteristics as held by crypto assets as against information, pure information, which does not. The legal statement is well worth a read. It's one of the more formative pieces of law we have in the UK on this, but it is quite dense. Anne Rose, my colleague, has written an excellent summary, which is on the website, which you can access using that link there. It's worth noting that all the graphics on this deck are actually hyperlinks to the source material, and this slideshow will be published afterwards, so you can always go back and click that if you want an easy reference point. Okay, so it's property, or capable of being property. What about derivatives? So hot off the press last week, the FCA announced a prohibition of the sale to retail clients of investment products referencing crypto assets, and that applies to derivatives and exchange-traded notes, ETNs. It enters into force January 2021, and this follows a relatively long period of consultation. This wasn't necessarily a shock. Like certain parts of the industry, probably understandably, didn't want this to be the case. Interestingly, in the policy statement from the FCA, they said that of their responses to the consultation, 95% of them were opposed to this step. I'm surprised they actually mentioned that when they ended up ignoring the 95%, but it certainly isn't a shock to many of us in the space. It is worth pointing out that this latest guidance has a number of carve-outs, so it doesn't apply to security tokens, i.e. tokens that underlying them ultimately would constitute a security, so perhaps a tokenized share constituting a security, tokenized real estate, etc., etc. It doesn't apply to tokens that aren't widely transferable, i.e. tokens that are only used on a private network that can only be redeemed with an issuer, sort of a pure utility token, but not one that you could then trade on a secondary exchange like Binance or similar. It doesn't apply to e-money tokens, we'll come on to that in a moment, to crypto commodities, where ownership of the actual commodity is recorded on the blockchain, or currencies issued or guaranteed by a central bank or public authority, which speaks to the CBDC point that was on our world map just a moment ago. All of this sits on top of the FCA's guidance. Again, I'm cheating here slightly because it was early last year. I think it was June or July 2019. But it's worth noting that the FCA in that policy statement updated their taxonomy of crypto assets. Previously, they had categorized crypto assets as security tokens, utility tokens, and exchange tokens. That created a bit of a nightmare situation where you had everyone that was a security token claiming to be a utility token and ended up costing a lot of people money, and unfortunately there was a lot of consumer harm flowing from it. The new FCA taxonomy is regulated tokens, which is essentially their old security token bracket, but slightly broader. E-money, which is any token that meets the definition of e-money under the e-money regulations, and unregulated, which is basically anything that doesn't meet either of the first two. Again, graphics in here are links to the underlying source material. So smart contracts, we've already very briefly touched upon smart contracts. Worth emphasising they're neither smart nor naturally contracts, albeit that the UK Jurisdiction Task Force did confirm that they are capable of being given legal effect and being legally enforceable. Though you need to have relatively careful analysis to make sure that that is actually the case where you want it to be so. So it's a little bit of a plug here. Tech London Advocates launched or published guidance to practitioners for using smart contracts, and that was published in partnership with the Law Society of England and Wales. This is a little bit of a plug. I'm on the steering group of TLA. TLA, to those of you that don't know, is one of London's largest networking groups for tech professionals. But really, we can't take any credit away from Anne Rose, my colleague, who was the driving force behind all of this and runs the legal and regulatory sub-working group of blockchain TLA, and she did a hell of a job bringing together all of the lawyers from a number of fantastic firms across the city, which I take it was a bit like herding cats. But the end product was some really, really useful guidance to practitioners, which I'd recommend you check out and read. It's well worth it. The guidance covers a number of areas. I wrote the technical annex explaining exactly what is blockchain, but it covers from a legal perspective a wide range of areas: dispute resolution, IP, commercial. There's a whole host of things in there for practitioners to think about when being instructed on advising on smart contract related matters. It's well worth reading. Finally, on the legal and regulatory updates, tax. I don't intend on dwelling too long here, mainly because I'm not a tax lawyer and it terrifies me. But it is worth pointing out that in December 2019, HMRC released their latest guidance to tax for businesses for using crypto assets. Interestingly, the main difference here is on a hard fork. So for those of you that don't know, a hard fork is when a blockchain is replicated and split to create a new token. The most famous examples probably being Bitcoin Gold and Bitcoin Cash, or Bitcoin SV, which stands for Satoshi's Vision. There's quite a key distinction here between the HMRC's position and the IRS in the sense. So for the HMRC, it doesn't consider tax to be payable on receipt of the hard fork token, and profit made on the disposal of a token is referenced by combining the two. The IRS, on the other hand, consider it essentially a windfall, and it should be taxed as gross income in the hands of the taxpayer. That's quite a problematic finding, and I'm not entirely certain how that's being enforced retrospectively. But is an interesting distinction and difference between two of the world's more leading tax authorities. It's also worth mentioning, and I haven't spoken about tax for individuals because I think that would be really cheating, because that's 2018, that's 2 years ago. The HMRC released some interesting guidance there around the situs of crypto assets, i.e. When is a crypto asset deemed to be UK resident for the purposes of tax. They said that for so long as the individual who has beneficial entitlement to a crypto asset is resident in the UK, that asset is deemed to fall under UK tax jurisdiction. Again, that's quite a problematic statement and raises all sorts of questions. There's some pretty damning contrary about that from some other law firms online, which are worth a read. But again, we're on hand to help with any questions you've got in that respect. It's an interesting area and it's rapidly developing. We're keeping a close eye on things as they unfold. And finally, trends and developments. So there's three things I've picked here, but they could really be pretty much anything. The first one is that blockchain is increasingly being seen as a priority for organizations, both public and private sector. Deloitte every year release a global blockchain survey, which is well worth a read every year. It's always quite interesting. Unbelievably, this year, 81% of respondents to that consider blockchain to be important or critical to their organizations in the next 24 months. I need to check the methodology because even I believe that seems high, but it goes to show that it is increasingly entering the real economy. It is increasingly being seen to have utility and is being taken seriously in sort of the highest levels of some of the largest organizations in the world. It's also worth saying that whilst it's happening in the largest organizations in the world, some of the most exciting things that are going on are happening in the startups and scale-ups. MTech, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, is our dedicated program for early stage businesses. It's now on its second cohort. We award a number of places every year to some of the country's most innovative technology startups, and we give them free legal advice and free strategic advice for so long as they are part of the program, and we get really, really close to some really interesting industry players there. Of the second cohort, there's a couple that are blockchain companies, likewise in the first cohort, and some of them are doing some really fascinating things. So we look forward to seeing them go from strength to strength. The second point here is that emerging technologies are converging. So as emerging and advanced technologies move to scale, so do they converge with each other, including notably blockchain and AI and blockchain and the IoT. You'll see that the word converge there is a hyperlink that leads to an article that Anne wrote for Chambers Blockchain this year. And this is a topic that I spoke to the European Commission on last year. Blockchain increasingly is being looked at and used as a way of transacting certain data points, not that's on the scale of data required to train machine learning models, or to enable the transfer of data between IoT devices that may well have been manufactured by competing entities even. Again, well worth saying that at the very outset of this, I said some of the things we're not speaking about during this session includes competition law. It's well worth emphasizing that there are some really, really interesting questions that are being raised in that market. If the whole point of blockchain is to enable trustless transacting, and we're seeing groups of otherwise competitive entities transacting on it, what does that say from a competition and an antitrust perspective? It's a really, really interesting debate that we'll happily have with you if you'd like to speak to us about it, but it's well worth bearing in mind and keeping on your radar. Finally, compliance, and perhaps we're biased because at the heart of the group is the law firm, but compliance really has never been more important. We've just seen the FCA last week banning the sale of crypto asset derivatives. We're seeing increasingly regulators in the UK and globally taking a pretty hard line on non-compliance, especially in the blockchain and the crypto asset space. We cannot recommend strongly enough that organisations looking to adopt or implement blockchain technology ensure that their systems are compliant by design, and that is both from a current law and regulation perspective, as well as being consistent with the policy and underlying reasoning for the law and regulation, and of course making sure that it complies with the company's own policies and position and data ethics footprint. We've really rattled through that very quickly. I've just looked at the time, so of course we're very happy to open up to questions. contact details on this slide. I've also got a link to the Technology Hub at Mishcon, the technology platform, which is our dedicated tech blog, which is updated multiple times a week with some of the latest developments. I've got a link to the blockchain group and a link to MDRxTech. For those of you that don't know, MDRxTech is our new business launched this week, albeit that we've actually been doing it for a couple of years now, which is focused on delivering digital transformation to clients. We talk about digital transformation that's compliant by design, making sure that our clients aren't doing really, really interesting things that they then have to shoehorn into compliance and either risk delays, more money spent, or probably worst of all, the paring back of functionality. We try and make sure that the architecture of whatever they're doing, the exciting things that they're doing, are underpinned by good compliance principles. Get in touch if you want to hear any more. I don't know if there are any questions because I can't actually see them. I don't think there are. Appreciate that was a real whistle-stop tour and we covered a lot of things at a relatively high level, but hopefully it gave an overview of some of the developments over the last few weeks. Ritwik, thank you for the question. Where will the PowerPoint be available? It will be uploaded to the Academy website. If you click if you click the Academy logo top right, once this is uploaded, you'll see it. But obviously, your questions if you're there. If you Google Mishcon Academy, it will be one of the first Google searches there, and all of the things will be uploaded there. I'll also put it on my LinkedIn later today. Can you explain the hard fork crypto assets again, please? Yes, of course. Thank you, Andy, for the question. So a hard fork is where a new crypto asset is formed or created rather, using the history of an existing blockchain. So, for example, in fact, it's probably easiest if I draw it. So a hard fork is where you have a historic chain like that, and in a moment in time, it splits so that there are now two different versions. That would be called crypto asset A, and that might be called crypto asset B. The holder of tokens at that moment in their wallet will all of a sudden have two assets in their wallet. They'll receive a split of, they'll maintain their current holding of A, and then they'll be credited a token holding of B. And sometimes it's 1 for 1. So for every 1 token of A, you get 1 token B. Sometimes it's 1 to 5, 1 to 10. It can be pretty much anything. But that is what a hard fork is. The difference on the tax treatment is that the IRS is saying that at that moment where you are credited these extras, that is classed as a windfall. The HMRC's position, in contrast, is saying that they won't consider any gain to have been made until you divest yourself of one or both of these two, and it exceeds the value of however much you bought that one for. Tom Johnson, where do you see regulation heading in the next few years? I think the trend globally is towards more stringent regulation, certainly to the extent that the crypto asset is being used as some sort of financial instrument. I think So I think it's moving towards more regulation, especially where it constitutes a financial instrument. I personally am not of the view that all of a sudden we need new blockchain legislation or regulation in many instances. Sometimes it can be helpful, and certainly I know, having spoken with Anne, some guidance from the ICO, for example, around data protection and its relationship with blockchain would be helpful. But generally speaking, I think the use of policy notes and guidance as to what the interpretation of current legislation and regulation is typically suffices, but obviously not always. I think the major carve out to all of that will be if jurisdictions and central banks in particular are really going to go after the concept of digital currencies hard. If they do that, there is clearly going to have to be a whole swathe of legal and regulatory intervention to ensure that the systems are set up properly to manage that. Again, that's something we're lucky to be involved in a couple of instances. Hans, who do you see as the leading players in the legal blockchain space in terms of internal implementation and adoption? I'm biased, but us. I think we are right at the breaking edge of innovation in this space. We're currently looking at what sort of data transacting of our own that we can do on chain, and hoping to finish that this year. I think the one other firm that I would say I think a very good job, and this by no means is to the exclusion of others, but what Herbert Smith have done in Australia is really impressive. They've really adopted a technology-first approach to a lot of the stuff they're doing for the, I think it's called the Australian National Blockchain Project or something like that. But that's them working in partnership with the government. So yeah, I think what they've done is really impressive. But I'm biased, but I think we're right up there. That's all of the questions we have open now. I'm happy to sit around for a couple of minutes and see if anything else comes in. Otherwise, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope it was helpful and useful. As I said, contact details are on the slide there, and this will be published online later. So please do get in touch if you'd like to discuss anything further. Thanks very much.